Welcome back to Off the Rak. I'm Walt Rakowich, and I'm really happy to have you here as we explore what it means to practice transformative leadership. It's truly my pleasure to welcome back to the show my dear friend and colleague and busy leadership speaker and coach, Tommy Spaulding. Tommy was formerly the president and CEO of the world-renowned leadership organization Up With People. And he's the founder and president of the Global Youth Leadership Academy and National Leadership Academy. And he's the founder and president of a leadership development training organization based in Denver, and he consults, trains, and speaks to hundreds of businesses and organizations across the country every year. Tommy has spoken to over 1,000 organizations around the globe and is a New York Times bestselling author of 3 books, including The Gift of Influence, his latest, what I would call labor of love, that he's here to talk about today. Tommy, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you on with me today.
It's good to be back, Walt.
Awesome to have you on. Before we kind of launch into your book, Tommy, you and I have a mutual joy, and that's building homes for poor families in Mexico through YWAM. And it's really a unique way of giving back to people in need, isn't it? And I just want to have you tell our audience why you love it so much, and I'm happy to chime in too.
Yeah. Well, 10 years ago, I had a 14-year-old stepson, and I hate that word stepson, so he's really my son, but I married Jill when he was 4 years old. So 10 years ago, he was 14. He was going through a kind of a tough time in his life, kind of figuring out his relationship with his father and me and his mom and just adolescence. And we're having a dinner party at the house, and we invited Walt and Sue and some other dear friends, and we're all just kind of sharing. And this was like a Tuesday, and Walt was saying that on Friday he's taking some inner city students in Denver to Mexico to build homes for hope, to basically build homes for the poor. And I said, "Tell me more about it." And he was telling me more about it, and I said to him, "Hey, can Anthony go?" And I was half serious and half just kidding. And then Walt, being Walt is this who he is. He said, "Absolutely. We're leaving on Friday," which is like 2 or 3 days later. And Anthony went on that trip, and it was transformative for him to leave, this, beautiful home in beautiful Colorado and a privileged life, to go down to Mexico and see a family that's been living in a tent their whole life, that makes $100 to $200 a year annual income, and to build them a home over 2 days. And Walt sent me pictures of Anthony on top of the roof, hitting, nailing the roof in, and just saying he was working hard. The first one at the site, the last one to leave, and it just changed his life. Fast forward 10 years later, Anthony is a senior at a West Point Military Academy, captain of the club hockey team, and just an incredible soldier, just a beautiful human being. So Walt and that organization, Homes for Hope, has had a huge influence on my son, and I have been back to build homes down there every year, sometimes twice a year since, and committed to doing that the rest of my life, because it's transformative to build a home for someone that doesn't have one.
Yeah, it's impacted you. I can tell. We started many years ago taking inner city kids down, and I think it's interesting, Tommy. Through service to other people, kids that look at those people and say, "Boy, they don't have. I have more than they have, and I'm servicing them." Feel a lot less victimized in our world.
Yeah,
and I think it's just a wonderful opportunity to take families down there and realize the importance of giving back.
yeah.
I really do. So, well, I didn't. That was kind of more of an icebreaker than anything, but I didn't expect that you'd cry for that one. So, but it sure is an impactful organization. So let's get to your book, Tommy. The last time we spoke, you gave us a hint about your book, which is now out, called The Gift of Influence. Let's dive into some of the principles. Your book is based on the premise that we've got the opportunity to influence approximately 80,000 people in our lifetime, if you consider the average lifespan of a person. Can you tell us a little bit about, how the people are responding to this now that your book is out?
Yeah. So when you write books, as you know, because you've written a book, well, you come up with an idea. And years ago, I heard a story about a teacher, and I think you're going to ask me that question
Hmm.
later on to me, Mrs. Lynn. So I heard this story, which we're going to share later on in the podcast. But then years later, I heard a statistic, and the statistic was that the average human being influences 80,000 people in their life. And how they got the statistic was a university did some life study on influence, and they believe that the average human being meets and influences in a positive or negatively way every day 2.8 people a day. From the second you wake up, the barista at Starbucks, the bank teller, the Uber driver, the new employee, the new customer, the new neighbor, that when we wake up, God puts 2.8 people in our life. And if you take 2.8 people a day times 365 days times 77 years of your life, which is the average life expectancy of a human being on the planet, you get exactly 80,000. So in our lifetime, we have an opportunity to influence up to 80,000 or more people, positively or negatively. And when I heard that, Walt, it just hit me like 80,000 people. I mean, that's a lot of people.
That's a full NFL stadium, Tommy.
That's exactly what I thought. That's exactly what, like,
Yeah.
where do they fit? Like, that's a football stadium. So I did the research. There's actually 37 stadiums, college and professional, 37 stadiums in the United States of America with exactly 80,000 seats. You know, you and I are Bronco fans. They only have 78,000 seats. But Lambeau Field with the Packers, University of Notre Dame, University of South Carolina, you know, these stadiums have exactly 80,000 seats. So my premise of the book, Walt, was what if at the end of our life, like right before we die, right before we're about to be with Jesus, like right before we're about to go to heaven, instead of going straight to heaven, we all go to a football stadium and we walk in that football stadium, and inside that stadium is 80,000 people filled. And it's every single 2.8 people a day that we met since we were little kids in kindergarten and middle school and high school and college and our entire life, all 2.8 people, every human being that we've met, that we've influenced, that we've connected with in our lifetime are in that stadium to say goodbye to us. And the question that I pose in the book is really our legacy. You know, what's the sound of that stadium? Are they giving you a stand ovation and just clapping and saying, thank you for taking me to Mexico to build homes when I was 14 years old and lost and confused? Thank you, Walt, for taking me down there. Like, is it going to be filled with 80,000 people screaming your name, thanking you for the influence you had in their life? Or that is the stadium going to be booing you because you've just been an ass your whole life thinking about yourself? Or is the stadium silent because you've been looking at this your whole life, looking down at the phone and not looking above the phone into the person in front of you? And is it silent because you never really connected with people?
Hmm.
And so the premise of the gift of influence is, how do you build a life where your stadium is filled with 80,000 people thanking you for the positive influence you had on your life?
It's powerful. That is really powerful. And you mentioned you mentioned the story of Miss Lynn,
Yeah.
and if you wouldn't mind, Tommy, you might as well talk about that. I mean, I got to tell you, when I read about it in your book, I cried. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just so impactful. But can you tell our audience a little bit about
Yeah.
that story?
Well, I already cried talking about Anthony, so I think I got my tears out. But you know, well, I'm a storyteller, and people will say to me all the time, "How do you write New York Times best-selling books? How do you do that?" And I say, I just tell stories. And I believe that when you tell stories, people remember stories. They don't remember, statistics and graphs and charts. They remember stories. And I heard this story years ago, and it was a true story. A little town outside Lincoln, Nebraska, and there's an eighth grade algebra teacher named Mrs. Lynn. And Mrs. Lynn was a seasoned teacher, and she taught eighth grade algebra for years. And it was a Friday afternoon, and 36 students were just about to walk in her class. But it wasn't just any Friday afternoon. It was the last period of the day on a Friday afternoon. It wasn't just the last period of the day, but it was the last period of the day on a Friday afternoon, the Friday before spring break was about to begin. So these students are 50 minutes away from spring break starting, and the sun is out, and the sun is shining, and the windows are open, and these 36 students walk in the classroom, and Mrs. Lynn realizes she ain't going to be teaching algebra that day. The kids are just ready,
Right.
right? And so she was a pro. And so she knew that she had to call an audible. And so she went to the students and said, you know what, we're not going to teach math today. We're 50 minutes away from spring break. Let's do a fun exercise. Everyone take out a piece of paper and write, your name on the top of the paper. And I want you to write down all 36 names of all your students. And she takes a piece of chalk and she goes to the chalkboard and she writes down everyone's first and last name in the entire classroom. And she goes, copy that board, write down the first and last name of all your 36 classmates. And what I want you to do during these 50 minutes, I want you to think about one kind word, one beautiful word about each and every one of these students. And so that's what they did. These 8th grade students wrote one beautiful word about each one of their classmates. The bell rang. She collected a piece of paper. These kids go off to spring break. But here's what Mrs. Lynn does during her spring break. She takes out 36 blank pieces of paper and writes the first name of all her students on the 36 pieces of paper. And then she transcribes 36 words. So Walt, you got 36 words about him, right? And Sue got 36 words about her. And so everyone got 36 words, and she couldn't wait to give this piece of paper back to the students the following week. If anyone that's on your podcast that's listening to this that's had an 8th grader, as I've had 3 of them, it's a tough time of kids' lives. They're trying to figure out their life. They're going through puberty. They're popping zits. They're just figuring out who they are. And so she couldn't wait to pour into these kids. Anyway, the following week, after spring break was over, the kids come back in the classroom. She passes out the piece of paper. And Mrs. Lynn tells the story about that for 10 minutes. She just marveled watching these 36 8th grade kids read 36 beautiful words about them. And they were glowing and they were smiling. Kids were wiping back tears, and it just warmed their heart. Anyway, 10 minutes are up and she started teaching algebra and told the kids to put away the piece of paper, and she never talked about that piece of paper or that exercise ever again. Fast forward now, 4 or 5 years later, it's now the mid to late 1960s, and Mrs. Lynn gets a phone call from a principal down the street, the principal of the high school. And it's a phone call that no teacher or no parent ever wants to get, that one of Mrs. Lynn's former students, Mark, in her 8th grade algebra class, went on to high school, became captain of the football team, graduated high school, and was drafted in the Vietnam War and was killed. And he was the first fallen soldier to be killed from this small town outside Lincoln, Nebraska. And he wasn't just any kid. He was the captain of the football team. He was a legend from the school. And so the principal was inviting all of Mark's former teachers to the principal, to the funeral. And so Mrs. Lynn went to the funeral service. It was just packed with people. And as she was walking out of the church, some of the teachers decided they're going to go to Mark's house to kind of continue honoring his life because they got invited to the after party. So Mrs. Lynn goes to Mark's house. She's in the kitchen eating sponge cake, just listening to people talk about Mark, what a great kid he was. And then this gentleman walks up to him and says, "Are you Mrs. Lynn?" And she says, "Yes, I am." And he says, "I'm Mark's father. There's something I want to give to you. Can you follow me?" And so she follows Mark's father down the hall, the last room on the left. She walks in this room. Within seconds, she's standing in Mark's childhood bedroom, but she has goose pimples. And she knows it's his bedroom because there's a Cornhusker duvet on the bed, and there's football trophies everywhere and pictures of famous NFL quarterbacks on the wall. But she sees on the corner of her eye something, an object, that gives her shivers down her spine. And it's a war helmet. It's a camouflage war helmet. It was almost like Mark's father can hear her thoughts. So he walked over to the bed and he picks up the war helmet and hands it to her, this camouflage war helmet. And she doesn't understand why she's in Mark's childhood bedroom. And she doesn't understand why Mark's father is handing her a war helmet. And it was almost like Mark's father can continue hearing her thoughts. So he says to her, "Turn it upside down." And so she takes this war helmet and she turns it upside down. And in the rubber bands that hold that helmet to a soldier's head was a piece of paper. And she took out the piece of paper, and it was a 5-year-old stained, scotch taped, crumpled piece of paper. And when she opened up that piece of paper, it had her handwriting with the name Mark at the top, with 36 beautiful words about him. Mm. And Mark's father says to her, "You were more than an algebra teacher. You've had a huge influence on my son. My son loved that piece of paper. He loved it. He often opened it up and read it. And every home football game, at high school, tucked under his helmet. And when my son was found killed last week in Vietnam, we found him wearing that helmet with that piece of paper tucked in it. You've
Amazing.
had a huge influence on my son. And
Wow.
Walt, when I first heard that story years ago, when you read it, when now millions of people around the world have read it, you just cry. And we cry because for me, it made me realize I want to have that kind of influence on the lives of others.
Hmm.
Like I want to have that kind of influence on my wife and my children, my friends, my family, my employees, right? My clients. I want to have a life like Mrs. Lynn had, that every day that I look at the 2.8 people that God puts in front of me and choose to bless them and serve them and love them and make a difference in their life and have a positive influence in the lives of others. And if we do that every day, we're going to have a stadium filled of 80,000 people thanking us.
Amen. A math teacher, imagine that. A math teacher from Lincoln, Nebraska had that kind of influence.
Hmm.
Um, hey, Tommy, you talk about, you know, you want to be an influence. How do you break that down? Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it's just the little things, right? But how do you break that down into everyday actions or behaviors to be a person of influence? How do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, first we have to hijack the word influence. And I loved your little promo, little thing you did. It talked about that influencer, and influence is not a positive word now. It's about
Right.
learning.
Not anymore these
How
days.
many clicks you got on social media, how many tequila bottles or pocketbooks you can sell on, the
Yeah.
marketplace online.
Right.
And we have to hijack that word. God made the word influencer, not by social media and how many clicks you get, but how many lives we change. That's what
Hmm.
an influencer is how many lives we can change for the good. And, I've been teaching leadership and coaching leadership and writing leadership books for 20 years now. And I'm a full-time student of the subject of servant leadership. And where I realized I was wrong is I used to think that influence was a part of leadership. But influence is not a part of leadership. Influence is leadership. It's not a part, it's the whole thing.
Right.
People are never going to say, I love the way he bossed me or mothered me or fathered me, or, they're going to say, I love the influence that this person had in my life, right? The
Hmm.
influence they had. That's what leadership is really all about. And, every day when we start our day, some of us, do Bible study, we pray, we meditate, whatever your faith takes you. But for me, after I pray, um, I do what I call an influence audit. I mean, you asked me a very direct question, like how do you change lives? How do you influence? And every morning we wake up and we have an opportunity to influence the lives of others. So I wake up and I think about who in my life needs influence,
Hmm.
who in my life, needs love. And what I like to talk about, well, is I think human beings do such a good job running towards fun and running towards happy things like happy birthday or happy anniversary. I heard you retired from your company. I heard you IPO'd your company. I heard your kid just graduated West Point. Congratulations. We do good at Christmas cards and congratulation cards and thank you. We influence the happy. We send cards and letters to our customers and our employees and our family and friends of all the announcements of weddings and graduations, all the good stuff. But what we fail to do, and it's not because we're bad people, but we're just human, is we don't run towards pain. And I wrote like 3 or 4 chapters in my book about great influencers figure out who in their life, who's going through a divorce, who's got a kid that's depressed,
Hmm.
who's bankrupt, who has to sell their company, um, who's has to downsize half their company, who's going through depression. Like we all have this stuff. Like Anthony that we talked about, that's a West Point grad, at 14, he was depressed and ADHD and ADD and OCD. And I mean, he was a struggling kid. We all have our stuff. And we say to people, you know, there's one thing I wrote down. I want to read it to you because it's the biggest lie that we say. Walt, I'm so sorry to hear this about you. If there's anything you need, please let me know I'm here. We say this all the time. If there's anything we need, I'm here for you. And I just think those words are the biggest cop out. It's the biggest BS, the biggest lie we say it to people every day. You hear someone's going through a tough time. They just lost someone in their family. Their kids on drugs. They're going through a tough time in their marriage. Oh, I'm so sorry. If there's anything you need, let me know. What we're saying is, I want you to think that I care. I guess I do, but I really don't want to do anything because I'm too freaking busy. So if you need anything, let me know. How many times do you call someone up and say, "Hey, you remember when you said if I need anything, let me know. I need something." You never say that. True influencers say you're going through a tough time and you just do it. Like, for example, I have a dear friend that had cancer. Actually, the husband and wife both had cancer at different times, but they live in Fairfield, Iowa. Her name is Lori Schaefer, and she had breast cancer, and she had to drive 2 hours every Monday from Fairfield, Iowa to Des Moines, Iowa to get chemotherapy for 12 straight weeks. And when I spoke to her company a couple of years ago, she didn't introduce me as, thought leader, New York Times bestselling author, blah, 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 blah. She said, when I had cancer years ago, and for 12 straight weeks, for 12 Mondays, I had to drive 2 hours every morning, every Monday to get chemotherapy. And Tommy Spaulding called me all 12 weeks, and he talked to me during those 2 hour drives for 12 straight weeks. That's who he is. Like my best friend that graduated, middle school with. I've known him since Little League at 12 years old. On my 50th birthday, when we had my birthday party, we all around the table. Corey Torre gets up and gives a toast and says, he could have said anything. No one knows me more than anyone more than Corey. I've known him since I was a kid. And he got up and said, when my wife left me and had an affair on me and made me a single dad of 3 boys, I was devastated. I gained 150 pounds. I lost my job. I started drinking. I went through such a spiral. And my best friend, Tommy Spaulding, called me every day for over a year, every day, to tell me he loves me and tells me that my best days are ahead of me. Right? Scott Wetzel. You remember Scott, the president of Compass Bank? I wrote it in my book, and I have permission to tell the story. But Scott's a prominent banker in our town, a wonderful man. When his son killed himself because he was bullied, cyberbullied, and jumped off a bridge and killed himself. I mean, it was awful to lose someone that have a friend that lost his son. And when I met with him a year or two after to talk about that experience, he said, a lot of my friends and family loved me, and I know they were praying for me, but not a lot of them reached out. Like, what do you say to the guy that lost his son jumping off a bridge? Like, it's awkward. But I wrote him books. I sent him books, and I sent him rosaries, and I prayed for him and sent him texts. And you just run towards pain. And so, Walt, to answer your question is, you want to live a life of influence. Stop sending birthday cards and Christmas cards. That's the easy route. Start waking up and thinking about who in your life is going through a tough time and actually showing up. Show up for people. That's what they say. That's the stories they're going to tell 10, 20, 30 years later. Is they're going to be in your stadium saying, you showed up for me, right? I got cancer and you went to the hospital and you showed up for me. It's showing up. And I just think we as humans do a half-assed job at showing up for people.
That's a really interesting, I think it's a really interesting point, Tommy. I think part of it too is that the person on the other end is not always prepared to receive the influence that you have. And maybe when they're going through a tough time, they just want to be isolated. How do you get them to the point where they're willing to listen to you?
Yeah, and sometimes they don't listen. And that's why
Right.
you just write letters and write cards and drop off food. And it's not always about the connection, because sometimes they don't want to be talked to. When
Yeah.
Scott lost his son, he didn't want to talk to anyone for a year. But I
Yep.
still mailed him something, a package and books and on grieving. And I mailed him stuff all the time, right?
Right.
You just keep on doing it, right? You just keep on showing up.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you and I have a mutual friend. You know him better than me, John Gordon, and he once said that the gift of influence is really about becoming a better human being.
Hmm.
And I really love that sentiment because I think it speaks to kind of getting right with ourselves before we go out into the world and try to influence other people.
Hmm.
And I like to talk about it from the perspective of humility and heart, but getting right with yourself. What have you found to be helpful when you're coaching other leaders before they set out to influence other people?
Yeah. It's interesting that you asked me that question, because, you, Walt, are the answer to that question, because I think that you're probably one of the most humble leaders that I know. And I've coached millions of leaders and influenced millions of leaders around the world. And if I had to pick, two or three of the most humble leaders, Jimmy Blanchard would be one of them, and you would be the other one. Just people that have reached far success, but then stayed humble. And it's a tragedy that the world we live in, I'm drawing a linear line. The more success we have, the more fame we have, the more positional authority we have, the more money we have, the more attention we have, the more books we sell, right? The more we have, you know, the more arrogant we become.
Yep.
It's a linear line. And 99% of the people in the world, my son Tate's got a gift of hockey. He's one of the best 16-year-olds in the country. He can play in the NHL one day, but I keep telling Tate, what makes you a great hockey player is the more success you get and the better player you get, the more humble you become. It's the opposite. And you asked that question is, if you want to truly influence the lives of others, you have to be deeply humble. Because when you're deeply humble, you truly are humble, not just deflecting compliments to be polite, but deeply humble. You don't need the attention anymore. You don't need the recognition. You don't need the fanfare. You don't need anything. So your whole life is about giving and serving. And influencers are servants. They want to give. And when you're broken and you need all the attention and you're not humble and you're arrogant, you're going to take all that attention. Right. And it's interesting. I've been working with high school kids for 25 years, kind of half of my life, and the other part of me is I've been working with corporate CEOs for 25 years. And just a few years ago, I realized it's the same stuff that I'm teaching high school kids, that I'm teaching executives. It's the same material. And here's what it is. You can't be a heart-led leader. You can't be an influencer. You can't live a life of positive influence in the lives of others unless you love yourself. Because if you don't truly love yourself and know who you are in Christ, you're going to want all the attention, all the recognition. It's about me, the corner office, my job. And every narcissistic leader, every self-serving leader we know in the world is because they're broken. They don't love themselves. And true leaders do. And so if you want to live a life of influence, you got to first look at yourself and look if you're humble enough to truly love who you are and to give all the attention away to others. That's the true gift of influence.
Isn't that the truth? I love that. It's not about you, Tommy, is it? It's about all the people that you influence.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your next project. What's around the corner? What are you thinking about writing about? Can you
Yeah.
give us a quick glimpse?
Well, you mentioned like people like John Gordon, our friends that write a book every 2 years or every year because they're so smart.
Amazing.
I'm not as smart as those guys, so it takes me about every 5 years to write a book. But I think about these books a lot. Like there's a lot of thinking that goes into. It's kind of like asking out a girl when you're in high school. You think about it for like a year, and then you finally have the guts to do it, right? It takes 2 minutes to ask her out, but you thought about it for a year. I think about the books for a long time, and so what's been in my heart, for a while is this thing called superpower. And Random House just picked up the book, so I'm starting to write it now, and I think it's going to be a game changer for people. And I believe when God creates us, when He makes us as humans, He gives us, we call it deficits, handicaps, obstacles, challenges. He gave me dyslexia. He gave me OCD. He gave me ADHD, ADD. I have learning challenges. I grew up, with, dad that drank a lot, mom that was pretty physically, tough on me. I mean, I had my obstacles, right? And I believe God gives us all these challenges and obstacles for two reasons. One is to teach us grit, because if He made us perfect, we wouldn't have this little enzyme in us to kind of work through stuff, right? To teach us grit. But more importantly, I think Christ wants us to follow Him and wants us to lay our feet down to Him and humble us. So He gives us these shortcomings to humble us. And I got lots of shortcomings. And so do you, Walt, and so does everyone. Everyone has these shortcomings that God gives us. They're gifts, actually. But I believe that most human beings on the planet live their whole life focusing on the deficits and the challenges and the obstacles. And I believe that when God gives us all these deficits, He also gives us, every human being on the planet, He gives us a superpower. Sometimes more than one, but usually it's just one. It's like something you're best in the world at, right? And I believe that 90% of the world, and I'm going to do some research to kind of back my thoughts up, but I believe about 90% of the world lives their entire life on the planet, never tapping into their superpower, right? And I believe if you find your superpower, and then you can actually change the world and do good. And if, leaders can find their superpower. And, it's interesting for me. I had terrible grades. I grew up dyslexic, and I was challenged through academic school and barely got through elementary school and high school and college, graduated 2.0. And when I was a young boy, I had a lisp, a really bad lisp. And my tongue went on the other side of my tongue. And when I spoke in public, I was laughed at because I had this lisp. And my parents didn't have a lot of money, so I went to the school speech pathologist. And for a year, I had to go to the speech pathologist an hour before school to take a raisin, place it under my tongue to train my tongue to hold the raisin behind my teeth so I wouldn't have a lisp. So I never spoke in public. I couldn't read. I was totally just challenged. And I'm one of the top communicators in the world. Every week I get up in front of 10, 20,000 people and communicate and speak and have, I'm a storyteller. And to think that I had a lisp and never spoke in public, until I was an adult, I had this superpower laying into me to inspire the world. But yet I was in the resource room and failing out of high school and with the lisp. I tapped into my superpower and changing the world because of it. And so I want to write a book to really inspire the world to find a way to tap into what they're greatest in the world at. Do you know your superpower, Walt?
I don't, Tommy, but I'm anxious to read the book because that might give me a better idea of what it is.
Oh, I know what your superpower is. Do you want me to tell you?
Sure.
Oh, Walt, your humility.
Huh.
You are the poster child of what humility is all about. The more success that you've had at Prologis and in your marriage and your relationships, all the success you had in your life, I've never seen you boast. I've always seen you give to others and serve others and be humble. And you don't just deflect compliments to be kind. You deflect them because it's a real thing. You really have this deep root of humility because you know who you are in Christ and you're a true heart-led leader. And it stems from this humility. That's your superpower and what makes you great.
Well, thank you, Tommy. I appreciate you saying that very much. So I'd like to, Tommy, I try to end every interview by asking my guests what they're grateful for. And, gratitude's a big part of my life. So I'd love to hear your answer.
I'm so glad I have my faith. I can just have this strong faith. And I'm so glad I have a wife that shares that faith. And I have kids that share that faith. But I think what I'm most grateful right now, besides my faith, is where we are right now with our adult kids. 24, 18, that's going to college, 19 and 16, almost out of the house. And when Jill and I got married, we had this philosophy, the Spaulding kind of mantra in our home is, if everything's important, nothing is. If everything is important, then nothing is. So everything's important to your kids, they don't know what's important. So if you ask any of my kids, what's important? They know to love Jesus, to love and value family, and to love and serve people. And one of the things that Jill and I wanted, what we wanted, is my parents got divorced, and I didn't really have a close family, because they got divorced and kind of lived, East Coast, and I just wanted to do life with my kids. And I realized that our kids have to live with us until they're 18. It's called the law. Our kids have to hang out with us until they're 18. But after that, it's not the law anymore. It's their choice. So if you want to do vacations with your adult kids and you want them to live next door and you want to raise their children, your grandchildren, if you want to have an influence in their life, if you want to, literally do life with your adult kids, you have to earn that, right? It's not a law, right? After 18, they're out of here. And, Jill and I just bought this beautiful, vacation home in Florida. And we just have this dream of growing up, doing all these trips and vacations with our kids and our grandkids. And what I guess I'm grateful for is that we've done it. We've got these 3 kids that want to do life with us, that want to hang out with us, that want to go to church with us as adults, that want to bring their girlfriends home and go on vacations with us and call us every day. Like we have it. And well, you and Sue have it.
Mm.
And very few people have that. And I just think that I'm just so grateful that's in my heart to have to earn that after all these years, to earn the love of my kids.
Well, I love that. There's nothing more important to any of us, I don't think, than our families. And but you're absolutely right. When they come back to you in your 20s and they tell you, "Hey, really would like to hang out with you," you just got going. Wow, must have done something right, I guess, right?
That's right.
Well, Tommy, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on this episode. And I will tell you that I'm really grateful to you for joining us today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I love you, Walt. I've always loved you.
I love you too, Tommy. And I'd just like to thank all of you who tuned in. Look, you can always find more insights from these conversations in the Off the Rak Plus newsletter. We've got episodes, highlights, transcripts, helpful takeaways, updates on future guests, and the like. So we got a great episode coming up next month with legendary Pittsburgh Steeler Rocky Bleier, who's going to join us. And speaking of Rocky Bleier, Tommy told us the story about Vietnam. Rocky was a Vietnam vet, and he has an amazing story about how he overcame incredible odds with a grenade blowing up next to his foot. Didn't think he could ever play football again, and came back and became a 4-time Super Bowl champion. It's just an amazing story. And so hopefully you'll tune in. And until then, I just encourage all of you to be human with one another and find a way to have a positive influence on somebody around you each and every day. Thank you. And thank you again, Tommy.